Alright, we got two more movies this weekend. One that's obviously the big wide release, and one that's more of the indie release. And obviously, I want to start with the Suicide Squad, especially since it was pretty much like almost exactly right around this time, 5 years ago, that I was really excited because another movie called Suicide Squad was coming out, and it was like my most anticipated thing that year. And I was under the impression it was going to be amazing, like many, many people. And then also, like many, many people, that had kind of. Those expectations had tragic consequences, I guess you could say. Uh, but the thing about going into that with that mentality, though, because it was already you already had this kind of really excited idea about this one with James Gunn having it now, having kind of coming over from Marvel in that little stint where he didn't quite work for Marvel briefly, um, which is obviously paying off extremely well. It was probably one of the best things that could have happened to him, at least in these past few years. And for us as an audience, because we get this. And it just seemed like this really perfect fit, where obviously he did the gang of superheroes, in this case obviously it's villains, but the same kind of vibe, really well with Guardians and Guardians 2, and using characters that were abnormal before they got their movies, like something that back in the day would have never attracted an audience because it just sounded weird, which of course, weird is Gunn's MO basically. But then add on the fact that he was going to get to make it like really R-rated and really gory and really go in on those weird aspects. And you realize that this is probably one of, if not the most perfect projects you could possibly put him in charge of. And pretty much right away, you can tell that this was gonna, because I was skeptical, obviously, because I'd been excited for a Suicide Squad movie before, and we saw what happened. Despite all the different factors going into this one, apart from the presence of Margot Robbie, Joel Kinnaman, and Jai Courtney, but and Viola Davis, of course. But apart from that, everything about it was obviously different and amplified, and we were gonna have new characters and all that stuff. Even Gunn really reaching even farther back into the these are the characters most people have probably never heard of kind of thing. And so it was exciting all over again. And then obviously reviews started coming out, and they were praising Gunn and all that, and the movie itself, and that was great. But I was also really trying to go into this as level as possible because I wanted to make sure that I can't speak for like the other reviews, but I wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be, oh, I really like this movie a lot just because it's not David Ayer's movie. Like, just because it wasn't that bad, it's going to obviously seem great by comparison. I wanted to make sure that didn't happen. Um, but no, I don't think that's the case as far as the good reviews go, because after the Green Knight this past week, this is now the second time in a row where I've seen something that is probably one of my favorites of the year so far, which is really exciting to get that twice in a row. So going into it, it was kind of. I mean, you get the sense, obviously, that it's going to be just kind of tongue in cheek in general, but you kind of wonder how much of the tongue in cheek factor is going to play into the fact that we had a movie prior to this that was kind of notoriously shitty, uh, and widely seen to be that. So when we get Viola Davis and she's saying the exact same dialogue that she was in the first movie to kind of start it off and show off the characters again, it was you couldn't quite tell where we were. Are we in like the tongue in cheek territory, or are we back in the same? Are we in kind of a stuck in a loop? Unfortunately, but no, it's clear right away. They start playing with like the different tropes and kind of going in different directions or setting things up. There's one particular really funny thing about how we get Bloodsport's backstory, Idris Elba, and then she lays out the whole thing like she does, like how most of the first movie was her just laying out stats, And she does that for Bloodsport, and then she turns right around and introduces Peacemaker, the John Cena character, and it's the exact same backstory word for word. Which is, and it's like right there, it's like, okay, I see what you're doing now. So, okay, I think we're going to be fine. Because obviously that was another thing about, like, the Guardians movie specifically, is how they're so comedy driven, despite being, action and sci-fi and everything else that it is, the superhero genre and all that. So obviously this is going to be laced with a lot of comedy. But once again, it's James Gunn, but it's not quite Guardians James Gunn. We're getting Guardians James Gunn, but we're also getting weird, gory, fucked up, black sense of humor James Gunn. And which, once again, fits this perfectly. And then as far as, like, saying, too much going in, like, I won't specify anything in particular that happens that would be spoilery, but I do think a lot of people, if you don't even want to hear this, then I just go away now, but it's very vague. A lot of people seem to have a grip on what the opening of this movie was going to be like. Which, obviously, like, it's obviously going to be a case of you see the whole cast list, the whole list of characters that we're going to have here. And yeah, pretty much everybody knew going into this that we were going to get that list whittled down to something. Like, it wasn't going to be all these people all at once all the time. We were going to have to cut this team down a little bit. But even with that, there is the whole idea that they're basically split up into two groups, so they have that going on also to kind of help that out. But it's still the opening a lot of people were pretty much expecting. It's just a matter of who comes out of this opening. And we've even got the whole thing where you can see characters in the movie basically being the audience, where they're Waller's people and they're watching all this, and they've got a betting pool going on of who's going to be the first to die. And it's basically the stuff you heard, like, fans doing, like when the first teaser trailer came out that was just showing off who was in it with no plot or anything yet. People were already saying, like, who's gonna die and who's gonna do it first, and, like, how are they gonna go, because this really goes all in on the gore factor. In a way that I don't like. I think people are expecting it to be over the top, violent and bloody or whatever. But this was unexpectedly gruesome most of the time. Like, it's not like there's like it's violent throughout. There's people getting shot or whatever, and then every now and then there's, like, gruesome. No, the really really gruesome shit is pretty consistent, along with people just kind of getting shot. I think more people die graphically, like, multiple pieces kind of ways than just getting shot. Which is what a problem that the first movie had, where a lot of it was just like you had, like, literally the faceless villains, and it was Will Smith just kind of mowing them down and Harley mowing them down, and it just didn't matter. Nothing mattered. Uh, and there was no weight to anything. Like, even doing the whole Deadshot's daughter thing was like, okay, who gives a fuck? So, what's another interesting thing about that Gunn did here to kind of throw off expectations was basically using, because there's the whole thing where news got out that Will Smith wasn't going to be in this, but Idris Elba was going to replace him as Deadshot, and then that eventually evolved into Idris Elba was going to play Bloodsport instead, which is I'm not knowledgeable much at all as far as these go, as far as the comic characters, but just from what you see in the movie, at least, they can be seen as similar characters, for sure. And all the way up to the fact that they do the daughter thing with Bloodsport as well, with Storm Reed, who was in that shitty Wrinkle in Time movie a few years ago. But the way they play this scene up, when obviously he's in the prison, and then and his daughter's visiting, and they're talking through the glass and all that, and then the direction this scene goes is wonderfully unexpected. Like, it's the case where it was like, one of the things that really annoyed me about the first movie was how it was trying to make everybody, all the villains, into heroes, and, like, the movie was trying so hard to convince you, oh, they're villains, oh, they're so bad, oh, they're so fucked up. But yet the movie like never showed that. It was always trying to make them likable and heroic, which was fucking stupid. And just this interaction alone with Bloodsport and his daughter, of all people, tells you like, oh yeah, this guy is a straight up villain to anybody. Like it's like he's just an all around bad dude. It turns out, as they all should be. And while of course we're gonna get to that same place to an extent where it's like yeah they have to be the heroes in their own story eventually, but making sure that it was established how evil and unremorseful they are most of the time, needed and is done really well. And I think the person that may have portrayed this the best, in my opinion, was John Cena of all people. It is very interesting. Just the character Cena plays and his performance are so fascinating as the movie progresses, because he seems like he'd be playing a John Cena hero character. But yet, even though he's doing it in like he's speaking in the tones and kind of the ridiculous way he's dressed, you could throw into this also, and how he has a lot of comedic lines. Like he's playing it like he's in a sort of PG-13 John Cena's the hero kind of movie. But yet, underlying throughout, his character's fucking insane. And he, like, he's so, even when they're doing supposedly heroic things, he's doing it in a very twisted way. And as he goes on, you can just see, like behind his eyes just gets darker and darker. And it's kind of amazing. He's, like, really fucking good in this. And I loved it. He might be my favorite character in it, come to think of it. Even though a lot of the characters, like a lot of the characters that end up being the focus, have a lot of their great sort of standout moments for themselves. Even like King Shark, who's hilariously voiced by Sylvester Stallone, and I could maybe see Groot comparisons, as far as like Vin Diesel's voice work and all that. But obviously Stallone gets a lot more to say, and I don't want to take anything away from Groot just saying 3 words and yet being able to do a bunch of different emotions with it is great. But King Shark here is so expressive, yet not. Like, it's almost like impossible for him to be expressive because of just his design, yet he somehow is. And it's... and obviously he's that character that you're kind of constantly like he's always kind of got your attention, like even with anybody else around him, he kind of steals his scenes that he's actually... I was trying to avoid the cliche of saying he steals the scenes, but that's what happens. Uh, and once again, doing so in this way that could be seen as, I guess you could use the word adorable to describe him, despite the fact that the ways in which he kills people and the ways that they have to repeatedly stop him from doing to the wrong people are the most gruesome moments in a movie that is consistently fucked up gruesome. And the way Gunn is able to combine these two different styles that he's mainly known for into one thing so beautifully, in a way that I was kind of expecting to go into this. Like, I was not expecting to find as, like, few faults, I guess you could say. Not that I try to go into movies, like, looking for faults. Maybe sometimes I do, but not, all the time. And it's kind of unfair to a movie to go into it like that. But, I mean, as far as, like, coming away from it, like, I was expecting to have some moments where it would be, like I would think it was good, but there would be things, like maybe it'd be over long, or there'd be scenes that didn't belong, or there'd be tones that didn't quite match up, like there's maybe, too much humor, or there's, like, character inconsistencies or something. which could just be the last movie haunting me or something. But like I said, I was really trying to not compare it specifically to the other movie throughout it. Yeah, long story short with that, it's I think it's better than good. It's like really, really, really fucking good. The whole thing. So going and once again, I think it helped a lot how early that was established. Like how early I was kind of hooked into it, and I think the final, like the one moment that kind of sold me, it's like, oh, I think I'm actually gonna really, really like this, because there has to be that moment kind of early on that does that. And in this particular case, it was, without saying too much, just the transition into the opening credits was like is when it kind of hit me. It hit me that early, where I was like, oh yeah, I think this is I think Gunn's style is gonna work so incredibly, like even more than you already thought it would, going into it. And then from then on, I was with it. So, like I said, I had some skepticism going in. I'm not even sure that's entirely attached to the first movie, quite honestly. But it won me over in 10 minutes, if that. So that's yeah. So that was, and it's also that case too where it's like, because of what the opening establishes, and this even goes into the opening scene as well. The idea that, because they built it up so much, like leading into the movie's release, that they were gonna actually really go all in on the kind of no character is safe thing, or at least to get audiences to think that way. And typically, when you hear that, you're like, you've seen enough movies and you've been burned enough that you're like, oh, that's probably just a marketing ploy. That's probably just bullshit. Um, but there are like moments throughout where if the camera lingers on a character long enough, I started to feel really nervous. Like any of them really. And it's like to be able to establish that, to an audience that would otherwise be so jaded, from things that have done this and failed, or things that didn't deliver on their promises. This was incredibly satisfying pretty much all the time. And as far as like bringing in past things from the previous shitty movie, Viola Davis really gets to go all in. Like Viola Davis was another one of those things where it was like the first movie was trying to convince us so hard. This person's so bad, and this person's so unpredictable and scary. And they were doing that with Waller too in the first movie, and it just wasn't working for me. Like I honestly didn't give a shit about her. Even when she was like blowing those dudes away that worked for her, it was like, that's like way late. So like, you were long past giving a shit. Yeah, finally, Viola Davis gets the chance to deliver on that, because obviously she's fucking Viola Davis. She has the capacity to deliver on that. But that's just like just how held back everything was in the first movie. I think mainly also because the first movie was focusing on all the wrong shit. That's the perfect segue to the other person I would like to talk about, which is Rick Flag. Somebody who I didn't speak too kindly of about the last movie either. Once again, I don't think anybody did, because he was just there. And when he wasn't just there, his whole thing was, he was a big part of the Enchantress story, which is obviously the worst aspect of that shitty movie. Uh, so that wasn't doing him any favors. And not to mention the fact that, much like Waller, his only purpose in the first movie was to just rattle off stats. So, the whole katana thing and all that, but everything else. And I know I'm doing the whole comparing it too much to the first one thing, but I mean, even without the first one, I really like Flag's character in this as well, because that's another thing that the other movie fucked over was, if people mainly know him from the first Suicide Squad, people probably don't realize how good of an actor Joel Kinnaman is. Like when you look at everything he's done in his career, these movies are kind of the weird thing. Like he was also the RoboCop in the remake. But like prior to his American movies, I guess you could say, this is like almost kind of a weird direction for him to go down. But he really gets to actually remind us that he's actually a really good actor. in various places throughout this movie, and we actually finally care about Flag, which is probably one of the most unexpected things going into this. So, and the whole thing where like he and Harley kind of have like a connection, like a sort of carryover. Her and Boomerang do as well, where it's like a sort of familiarity thing, and it like brings them together. And it's like I thought it was really dumb about the whole friendship angle they were going for before. Um, but here, just I don't know what it was working. It was coming together, and once again, I don't think it's just comparing it to the quality of the previous movie, but just something about the characters works so much better in this, and it's also like when we see the kind of connection that she and Flag have, it's like probably halfway through the movie. So by then it's been able to kind of establish itself even more. Um, where they're coming from with that. Not like on top of the fact that they had a previous movie to lead into that as well. So all of that was handled in an appealing way and made the characters a lot more appealing than you might be expecting going in. And then talking about the kind of dark sense of humor that Gunn can bring. Um, there's some really great bits. Some of my favorite bits in the movie, probably my favorite bits in the movie, are this whole rivalry that Bloodsport and Peacemaker have going on. About basically which one of them is the more badass or which one of them can get more kills in. And we get a scene that demonstrates this rivalry. And what was also really great about this was you talked about, like, when you see all the different characters, you think, oh, that's their one thing. Like, Javelin is the Javelin, and, this character is just guns, or this character is just a sword, or whatever it is. And they just have that one weapon, and and while it's, obviously the point is for them to have, like, their gimmick or whatever, it can get a bit one note if a character just kind of has one weapon. So when we see this rivalry going on where Bloodsport and Peacemaker are basically having a competition to see who can kill the most people, like, every time they kill somebody, they're using a new weapon. And Bloodsport especially, just, like, the way his arsenal is, like, attached to him in the ways. There's just so much creativity in this scene, and it's, like, one of the most fun action scenes I've seen for a while. And it has a final payoff that is amazing. So, there's that. And I guess I haven't really talked much about Margot Robbie. Like I said, I was never really that attached to her as Harley from the first movie. Because I know, like, everybody was, like, going insane and saying, like, oh, Suicide Squad is shit, but Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn is everything I ever wanted and stuff like that. And everybody's saying, like, she was the high point, and it's like, she's the perfect casting. And I just really, really found her I really am trying to avoid the word cringy, but that's all I can think of. I don't have a synonym that matches up off the top of my head. Was not feeling Harley in the first movie, honestly. And the just like it was basically they were trying a little too hard with it. And then with I really liked Birds of Prey, and then that was kind of when it was like, okay, I can dig this Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn thing now. And then she's introduced in this one and says a line that's probably right out of the first movie, as far as that kind of thing. But as the movie goes on very quickly, she really comes... Because a lot of her scenes are kind of solo because she gets separated from the group. Which sounds like it might be a cliche sort of thing in itself, but no, there's a very balanced back and forth between all the characters, even when they get split up. And especially with Harley getting to show off by herself, really comes through in a way that wasn't necessarily before. And she gets like, I know some people thought the action scenes in Birds of Prey, particularly like that bank scene, or no, the police station scene, was a bit... I don't know, I remember liking the action in Birds of Prey pretty well, and it was well constructed, even if it was doing the slow-mo a bit too much. But here, we do also have the slow, but she has one big action scene all to herself that's kind of amazing. And it was also perfectly timed, because there was one thing I was kind of having a problem with in the middle, and then it's like, I don't know if it was like Gunn caught himself or what, but it was like I had just one problem with the movie in the middle of it, and then it was like it was like right in the middle of it, and then it was like the entire second half of the movie was basically making up for that, which was one thing, especially when you look at like the Guardians movies, you'll see that something Gunn does really well is having the screen just like bursting with color, because you talk, and obviously DC movies especially get a lot of hate for this, which is how so many of them just look so dark and colorless and like drained of all energy. Um, and then you add in this whole idea of Gunn being able to just make, and that could sound obnoxious if you're just kind of describing it vaguely about how like he just has colors bursting off the screen. And it could almost be like, oh, it's just a diversion or something that the director's doing. But no, he does it in this really, like, well, to go on what I was kind of not with in the middle there was the lack of that. Where it was like, it was kind of felt like the setting was kind of doing it in a little bit and kind of making it like, we had a lot of dark scenes, and there was a real contrast from the usual sort of liveliness that we know from Gunn. Like the opening scene is in the dark too, and then right about the time I was thinking, oh, as far like aesthetically, it's getting pretty dull. The Harley scenes keep it alive, but then when we cut back to Flag and Bloodsport and everybody else, it's like it was all kind of this same, like any other generic sort of like action movie in this kind of setting or in a similar setting. And it wasn't, because obviously you can see from the beginning and in these middle scenes that Gunn's inspirations seem to be like war movies, like kind of classic war movies. Um, but still, it was like it was drained of most of that, vibrant nature that Gunn has. And then right around the time I was thinking that, we get this really big Harley scene that is just enormous and just, bursting with creativity and color and brightness and all that, despite the brutality of it. Is in itself is an amazing contrast, the brutality of what's happening and the way that it's shown visually. But then there is also an action scene that typically would be another one of those in the dark action scenes, where it's like a car chase. But while we're watching this car chase in the dark, it's brought to light literally by like police lights that are on the vehicles, and then something will explode and there'll just be this burst of fire, and it actually looks really cool with all those colors kind of combining amidst the darkness, which was really wild. Um, and King Shark gets a really a colorful scene that goes in an interesting direction, kind of towards the end. So it was like there's that middle portion where aesthetically it's not that pleasing. There is a dance scene with David Asmalchian that has that's, yeah, I don't want to say too much, but there's a very interesting dance scene in this, and usually that's a red flag in any movie, and especially in a movie like this, it should be a massive red flag, because how out of place can you be? Yet it vibes so much with the movie's energy up to that point, and the lead-in we've already gotten to Polka Dot Man's character, and what exactly is going on here. It fit in this really weird James Gunn sort of way, and I don't know how he does it, but it reminds me a little bit of it might remind some people a lot of Taika Waititi's style and the way that he can juggle tones, just back and forth, seemingly impossibly, but somehow doing it perfectly to the point that it hits every beat, even if it might seem all over the place on paper, which is, of course, appropriate because Taika Waititi's in the movie briefly. And speaking of scenes with Taika Waititi and just in general the tone shifting, obviously with Gunn you have, everything's going to be really lively, and there's going to be the gore everywhere, there's going to be a lot of black comedy and all that stuff. you might be wondering where the heart is and where the heavy moments are, and if they're gonna work amidst all this chaos. And yeah, they're there and they hit hard. Like I said, especially those scenes when Cena's starting to get darker as a character. It's really hitting these notes where it does hit these really serious beats. And the way that you can see, and like I said, so many filmmakers try this and fail. Usually they're ones that you don't really hear about very often anyway, so, fuck them anyway. But like with Gunn, the way he shows off, like, hey, like it's basically James Gunn is basically a movie lover's best friend, or like a movie going audience's best friend, where it's like he will give you all the fun and all the chaos and just everything you're there for, and throw in all the humor and all that stuff. And most of the time, the humor works. But then, on top of all this, he obviously cares deeply about what's going on story-wise and the individual characters themselves. And then that comes through at just the right times without feeling like there's some drastic tonal shift. And then it can get right back into the fun afterwards. But he lingers on those moments just enough. Like, cause I think what the lesser filmmakers do is they're too quick to get right back into the humor. Like, they can't wait. So they just immediately put something comedic right after those. But while he does go back and forth in those tones, Gunn does know how to linger on the more dramatic bits and the more heavy bits just long enough to where they get to that point and they hit just the way they need to, and then we can kind of get back to where we were. And he has to do that a lot, especially in like the last third. And it was all working for me. It was all coming together. So that's and just really in general what he's doing here on a visual level. Like there's like you talk about how a lot of superhero movies might seem the same to a lot of people and how they have the same beats. We were just talking about this in our Loki video, I think. And but the way, and it's not just a case of, oh, he makes a cool visual choice here, and then the movie kind of looks generic, and then there's no. It's like I was talking about the color and how that stuff is used, but just in general, like the way he uses visual storytelling. Like we were talking about the exposition. Like there's just so much exposition in the first movie, and here he does actually. While we do get that exposition, it's always accompanied with some kind of inspired visual, and it's told in such a way to where it's like, where like it's never really feels like some jarring flashback. Some people might feel that way about a scene towards the very end that's kind of a flashback, but I feel like the scene is so beautiful and emotional that it's not that jarring, especially with the way it's paying off in the moment. But yeah, like there's a fight scene that's done in basically a reflection. That's great. Ratcatcher 2's backstory, the first Taika Waititi scene, is done in this really great visual way. And that's consistent throughout. Like, it's consistently visually appealing. And another thing that it does is when it's showing you, like what the next thing is, or what the next location they're going to go to is, and words come up on the screen. And usually it's just this generic, like, here's where we are, here's where we need to go, or whatever. Or here's the next task, or whatever. But the way he uses the scene, like, things in the scene itself, there's one in particular where we get a location on top of a building, and as the camera pushes in and goes into the scene, it's just like the set. Like, pieces of the set were making that are actually physically there. I don't know if they were physically there or if it was a CGI shot, but either way, it was part of the building. And it was a crazy shot. And after that car chase, when things are blowing up, when the next objective was in the fire of the flames, and it's like that, they're doing that the whole, like, every kind of transition to the next thing is that, and it never gets old or played out because he's doing it in different ways every time that kind of catch you off guard and how creative they are. And yeah, I really, really like this damn movie. So, I don't know, like I was saying, like, obviously it's the whole thing of, it's not just, comparing it to Ayer's movie. Even if you, sit here for like 20 minutes just praising the movie's ins and outs, you're still going to have people that might just dismiss you and say, oh, you're just saying that because it's a little better than Ayer's movie. No, it's definitely significantly, as far, like, a step, like, you can't even describe how much of a step up this is, by comparison. But I will say I do feel bad for Ayer, when it's starting, because I've been one of those people where it's like, I've been kind of criticizing Ayer a lot post Suicide Squad, like saying like, oh man, what happened to him? But when he came out right before this came out, and he was praising James Gunn and talking about exactly what happened. Like, anytime a movie has way too many fucking songs in it for no reason, and they're all shittily used, and like ruin the coolness of the song, I immediately say David Ayer because of Suicide Squad. And to learn, apparently, Ayer say that the Suicide Squad soundtrack was not his decision. He wanted to do all score. I got a lot of backpedaling to do on what things I've been saying about David Ayer since Suicide Squad, and yeah, but it feels kind of right that he like came out and he praised Gunn and what he was doing here, and that in itself kind of shows you the movie we maybe could have possibly had, in a sense, 5 years ago. But I know they took off a few of Harley Quinn's tattoos as well, because Gunn was like, I don't really like those, and I guess Robbie said I didn't either. So, so it does feel like, they're kind of cleaning things up a little bit. But also, it's definitely, in its own glorious, twisted, fucked up way, its own amazing thing. So, yeah, so I'm like really happy with this. I kind of can't wait to see it again. And I feel like I might even like it more a second. Like, it'll be that kind of thing where the more you go back to it, like, the more things you'll see to love about it, I would say. Which is great. I didn't really say anything. I think the only person that's major I didn't really touch on, that I can remember off the top of my head, was Peter Capaldi, as the Thinker. And he's not here as often as I would have maybe liked. But it is, as far as him being that character that just has that real sense, like, to have the sort of comic book villain, really have a classic comic book villain feel, while basically being like a side character that's basically the catalyst for things to happen, rather than really kind of getting to do his own thing. He was basically the perfect casting choice just for the presence he can bring alone, because that's basically what makes the character stand out the most. Since he more or less just kind of is the gateway to other things, rather than getting he's one character I wish had more sort of individual moments, but it's fun to see him here in this kind of role regardless. So there's that. And if I missed anybody, there's a lot of fucking people in this movie, so yeah. So going on to our second movie, which is Zola, which is a movie I didn't really hear too much about. There's another movie that I can't remember off the top of my head now that I was actually confusing it with for a while, just by the titles, but this is definitely a very original movie as far as like filmmaking goes, but I was very concerned going in because it is and I may have some of those, I bashed Paper Towns a few years back, and we got a comment saying that I was an out of touch old man because I didn't like Paper Towns, and if a movie is going to come along and make you feel a bit out of touch, it would probably be this one. But once again, though, it's really the filmmaking itself. Like, even if you have like a detachment from what's going on here, and the way in which the story is told, and what's like the way social media is used very prominently to tell the story, there's something here, as far as like the creativity and the originality and the way that it's made, that might pull you in regardless. Because I will say, when I learned that an independent movie had been made based on a Twitter thread, I couldn't have possibly been less interested. I didn't know anything about what this was or what that Twitter thread was about. Um, but it is, and I wish I wanted to go in and like read the whole thing before I saw this, but I didn't get the chance to. Um, but I could see this being something that kind of has this sort of like there's almost like layers to how more and more like the whole setup is she's saying like if you want to know how this happened, get ready because it's suspenseful, which is a huge paraphrase of it, but yeah, so you can see where it's almost like step by step crazy, this story, especially since most of it apparently happened. And the director is a woman named Janixa Bravo, who very much has her own style and vision. Like, this is the kind of thing where I could see people comparing it to other directors and other movies. Like, Harmony Korine could probably get brought up. I felt like there was a lot of Sean Baker in it, the guy that did The Florida Project and Tangerine. But it's definitely probably unlike anything you will have seen, whether you appreciate the social media approach or not, which is very interesting. And I think it helps a lot the lead actress, whose name is Taylor Page, who is playing Zola at the center of this, um, is so, like, grounded in the middle of because it's this case where things are getting so incredibly over the top, but it's another one of those cases where it's like a truth is stranger than fiction kind of thing. So you need a lead character that's gonna really but be able to do both these things, kind of embrace the over the top quality and craziness of what's going on, but also be grounded enough that you never quite forget that this most of this apparently happened for real. And the way she's able to do that balance, where it's like she always has this, has this look, a lot of the time that I loved, where it's like you can tell she always seems aware when and if there's like bullshit afoot, and when there's a situation that's probably totally untrustworthy. But there has to be that balance there because this is also a character that gets roped up into all this anyway. And the way we kind of see her fall in with that in real time, more or less real, like it feels like real time, and a lot of it might as well be, despite it taking place over multiple days. It has the feel of real time in its flow. And a lot of that also comes into play as far as like being able to see her transition from I know something's fucked up about this, but I kind of can't resist anyway. Like I just need to open one more door and see what's behind it, and then it just gets worse and worse. Um, is this woman that she meets, Riley Keough's character Stephanie, and the thing about this character is, first off, she has a very unenviable job here, as far as her performance. Because Stephanie is a character where it's like, you would probably, if you didn't know somebody like her, you would probably think this performance was way too much, or this performance was way too much of a caricature. But I've met at least a few people, like not many, but I've met a few Stephanies, and it's kind of eerie how accurate the performance is. And like I said, it's that whole thing of if you've met people like her, it's a totally different thing from if you haven't. When it might seem like, oh, this is a bit much. Like this performance is like way over the top, but it's really not. So, and to see these two personalities, but for a while there's a lot of so you can see something happening where you can see them kind of drawn to each other. But then there's a lot of times where the contrasting is coming in as well, and that's where a lot of the conflicts keep kind of fluctuating and kind of coming in and out, as far as we get deeper and deeper into this. And this is not helped by the inclusion of two more characters. We have Nicholas Braun, who is Stephanie's boyfriend, who is really not okay with what a lot is going on, but he's also so incredibly drawn to her and kind of obsessed with her in a way, that's not meshing at all with the craziness of what's going on here and how they're the things that they end up doing for, because it starts off as, hey, dancing on a stripper pole is fun, and stripping for money is fun, and we can make a lot of money, and that's great. And then taking that and going into darker and darker angles as things progress and progress more into the degrading, I guess you could say, in the way that it's not that sex work is entirely degrading, but the way this is shot though, and the situations just have this such really dirty feel to it. But the interesting thing about that is how energetically it's shot and edited. That kind of gives you both vibes of you're not quite sure where the characters are. Because another director I wanted to compare this to was Gus Van Sant, and not because it looks like a Van Sant movie or even really feels like a Van Sant movie, but Van Sant movies have this way of observing behavior without really moralizing one way or the other. I talk about this a lot, especially with like Elephant, where it's like the movie's not really taking a stance. We're just kind of watching the characters go into a certain world and then just observing what happens there. And that's basically what it is. Like, it's not particularly, despite it being a story that has, steps as we go further and further down, it's not, it doesn't necessarily feel narrative driven, even though it has much more of a narrative than some movies that are, like, totally the opposite. But still, there's a feel here that it's not really trying to take some sort of stance on anything or have some sort of message at the end of it. I guess the only message would really be careful who you follow into the fucking underworld, basically. I remember hearing a little while back, the director had said something about, like, Blue Velvet being an inspiration, which I can kind of see. And because obviously when you think about stuff like that, you have to have another side of what exactly is keeping this main character, Zola, here, despite the fact that she knows when something's wrong. And that is the Coleman Domingo character, who we saw in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom recently. As a, for most of the movie, unnamed character that is basically in control of what 70 does, in essence, a pimp. And the threat level that he has, because there's also a twisted sense of humor throughout this movie as well, and that was something I was kind of having trouble gauging. Like, I remember hearing, like, when it first, was at a film festival, it might have been at Sundance, like, last year, like, the early last year, that it was, like, as dark as the movie was, it was also, like, hilarious. And I can get that sense. It might be one of those movies that's a lot more, like, more of an experience with a crowd, which I clearly didn't have. But I wasn't quite getting the hilarious vibe, but I could get a sense of like, there's these just little touches, like, the fact that Colin Domingo's character can be very scary and very threatening, yet whenever he's being scary and threatening, he goes into an accent for seemingly no reason, and it's basically a running joke. So there's a lot of stuff like that, that I could recognize, but wasn't quite hitting me in the way it was probably supposed to. But it's clearly gotten a very, very positive reaction. Like, a lot of people are, like, going crazy for it. So I feel like I'm definitely in the minority of, I get, really, it's just one of those cases where I can really appreciate it, for, like, being, like, I can really respect the original filmmaking behind it. Like, there's a particular moment when we're seeing this through Zola's perspective, and all she's doing the whole thing where we're seeing it through her social media. We're hearing, like, the Twitter sound effects throughout the whole movie as people speak. But it's, in the way she, like, addresses us specifically as she talks. Like, she, like, pauses the movie for a second to tell us, okay, watch this, or look out for this to happen, or whatever. And then just, like, somewhere halfway through, it just stops completely, and we get a quick rundown of Stephanie's perspective. And it does it in, like, this really strangely unexpected comedic way that's much more over the top comedic than the rest of the movie has been. As over the top as the rest of the movie is, if you can believe it. But the way it does it in such a pure comedic fashion, there's so many interesting things going on with how the movie's made. I said there's one particular, when I was talking about the editing and the way it's shot too, there's a montage. A montage that should not be as energetic and full of life as it is, but they went on. It's very creatively done. And like I said, the way it almost takes this sort of jovial stance on what is essentially this sort of dark underworld that's getting more and more dangerous the farther they go into it, and just that juxtaposition of everything. There's definitely something here to admire for sure, but I was just kind of feeling cold to it, in a way. Like I don't know if I was completely, I wasn't connecting as much with the characters as I wanted to. I wasn't finding it as like funny as I wished I had. Like I wish I could have had the experience a lot of other people seem to have. But it's really just kind of a respect thing. Like I really like the way that it's made, but like narratively, I don't think it was working for me, and the characters, I guess I just wasn't quite getting. And like I said, there's obviously going to be some sort of detachment because of how accurate it is in regards to how it depicts like social media. But if you're somebody like me that has completely avoided the social media thing, you could still get something out of it for sure, but there is going to be that detachment like I was talking about at the beginning of this. So, and I think that detachment was something I couldn't quite get away from. So I kind of felt into it and out of it basically throughout, kind of back and forth. So there's not really much else I think I can really add to that. So I'm just kind of in the middle on it, I guess. But I can absolutely see what people see in it, and I can also imagine somebody walking away just absolutely, completely hating it. I completely can get both perspectives on that. I'm just kind of stuck here in the middle. It's great as far as a filmmaking achievement, but I didn't feel particularly drawn into it as much as I wish. Like that, like, and it's especially frustrating when you can see how much energy is in it, but that it's not quite hitting you. It's basically like you're watching other people have like all the fun. And like I said, a lot of audiences apparently really took to this, so I'm kind of on the outskirts of this, but that's basically where I landed on it, was just in this middle ground of respect more than, you know, getting much out of it personally. So I guess I'm going to leave this at that. So the next thing is, I keep building up to this Nicolas Cage video I'm doing. Yeah, I'm getting much closer to that, so it should be the next thing after this, pretty easily. And then, I don't remember what next week is, but I will figure that out, and that will happen. So, yeah, so I guess I can just leave that to this. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.